So let me introduce our speaker. Tracy Brown is an experienced consultant who focuses on getting the best possible experience for customers and teams that deliver them. In collaboration with the Berlin School of Creative Leadership and strategy partner, Barry Mowszowski, Tracy has been leading a global study and podcast series called The Future of Doing. We'll share the link for this at the end of the event. This Future of Doing study has evolved into a hands-on touring workshop focused on the needs of teams who deliver innovation and creativity as their primary function. Tracy's kindly agreed to share with us a preview of this study, and our hope is that it will inspire you in your organizations as you rethink the role of a team and leadership in the new world. So I'm going to hand over to Tracy now. Thanks a lot, guys. Enjoy.
Okay, great. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Great. So the Future of Doing is pretty much been something I've been working on for around 8 months now. So a fairly long time. And it's a collaboration between myself, as Dan tried to pronounce, Barry Mowszowski, who's my strategy partner, and the Berlin School, who's represented here by Marilia, who's the Director of Strategy and Learning Innovation for the Berlin School. So for those of you who don't know, the Berlin School is a creative executive MBA school, but that also oversimplifies what they do. They've been around for about 15 years now, and they were the first to recognize that the creative industries needed a separate type of MBA. So they're the first to have created a creative MBA, executive MBA. And they have a very global courses. Unfortunately, that's obviously been impacted by the current crisis, but they're an exceptional partner, as is Barry. So all of us have been working in a form of creativity for a number of years, either as strategists, designers, creatives, and even my brief period as a really bad tech, working in innovation labs and looking at the way in which the creative industries are unfolding. I started working with the Berlin School in June last year, and I spoke at the CCLP event where we were focusing on the future of work. And as a part of that, I realized that I'd seen a lot of employee experience content everywhere, and also a lot of future of work content everywhere, but not a lot of it had been focusing on what I consider to be unique needs of what I call creative making teams. Sorry, let me just get back to the presentation. Okay. So we will talk about creative makers throughout this, and I've mentioned it a number of times in the podcast. So when I talk about creative makers, I mean that there's a new type of team. So creative has been redefined over the last few years. So we're talking about teams of people who are a combination of strategy, design, technology, and creativity. And you can see those types of teams in different guises in innovation labs and agencies. Ultimately, because a lot of the work we do now is so complex, and because we have to move at pace, a new type of team has arisen that ultimately can come up with differentiated ideas and also make those ideas. But getting those teams together is like magic. They have very specific requirements in order to be able to work well, and essentially that's who I've been studying for the past 8 months. So in the background, before coronavirus became such, started taking over our world, I was giving a lot of talks about the future of work. A lot of those ended up focusing on artificial intelligence and not a lot else. But there are so many different aspects to the way in which work is changing, and a lot of those changes are very relevant to creative making teams and why they've become so valuable. So first of all, innovation, as you know, has become almost like a hygiene factor, and it's becoming even more so now when we realize that we're in unprecedented territory, and most businesses are going to have to innovate very quickly in order to navigate out of something they've never really experienced before. Most of you would have seen that design sprints, design thinking, even innovation labs have become almost commonplace in organizations in a way they hadn't before. Innovation was very much treated as a kind of vanity for organizations, or it was something that was quite niche and only existed in a certain part of the world or certain organizations. And so there's much more of an emphasis on innovation because it's a survival tactic for businesses. In order to survive, you have to differentiate, and in order to differentiate, you have to innovate. We also have so many conversations, as I say, happening about artificial intelligence that I may look a little bit cynical because I've had to have about, so many myths around this topic, around what artificial intelligence can do, what it's likely to be able to do over the next 10 years. And that's a topic in itself. But one thing that's become apparent is that creativity is something that cannot easily be replaced. Certainly not with artificial neurointelligence, which is where we are right now. And because of all of these things, creative making teams have become super valuable, and now they have choice in a way that they haven't had before. When we look at where that talent is distributed, it's no longer sitting within agencies, it's sitting in tech companies, it's sitting in micro consultancies. People are working for themselves, they're creating their own form of working, a combination of those things. And so they can pretty much choose where they work. Especially if they figured out how to work in those kinds of really valuable teams. Now, obviously, the current climate means that all of us are insecure about our future prospects. But I think what is becoming clearer by the day is that innovation and digital ability to create digital products and services is something that will continue to be valuable in the next couple of years, ongoing, basically. Okay, so the study is quite vast. We started speaking to people late last year. So it was global. We spoke to people in America, Europe, the UK, Asia Pac. So here in Australia, across people who'd worked in Japan, Indonesia, China, etc. We also spoke to people in Africa. There were 42 participants in total. We were very selective about who we spoke to. So we spoke to people of exceptional talent. There were 14 interviews and 28 survey participants. We also, again, focused on multidisciplinary creativity. So we spoke to techs, designers, creatives, and strategists, and very diverse demographics, varied ages, genders, ethnicities, sexualities, cognitive variance in the sample. We also spoke to permanently employed and self-employed people in different guises. So people who were freelancers, but also people who were running their own consultancy or startup. And then we also spoke to such varied organizations. So we interviewed people at Instagram, Facebook, Google. We spoke to huge global agencies, micro consultancies, niche consultancies, publishing houses, client-side organizations. And so there was a lot of variance in who we spoke to and where they worked day to day. And we started by sort of looking at what we consider to be the key pillars for creative making employee experience, so the things that genuinely mattered to them. Sorry, I'm just trying to move this video screen. So the first is purpose, and that's really something that's become quite topical over the last few years. And it's because a lot of people say, well, it's a millennial trend, and that's kind of nonsense. I think most of us are starting to realize that we don't really want to work for organizations that we don't believe in. And so it's a big question. Can I believe in this organization if I'm going to work for them? And then the question of value, and that's really how people are paid, whether they are promoted fairly, whether they are made to feel as though they are valued by the organization. Then there's the whole topic of selling, which is a very prickly area for this community, but that's really about how people sell their services and also how their services are sold to clients as well. Ideas, so can I do great work? Obviously a very important part of the creative making experience. So environment is about if people can feel situated. So we have distributed workplaces today, and that has always been the case for some organizations. But this is really about the sense of place. And then the question around collaboration. So can I work with others, which is, we found out, probably the most important contributor to great ideas and happiness in the workplace. So we have a lot of insights. We are running a series of workshops where we will dedicate an entire day to just one pillar. But if you want to go into the insights in great detail, there's also a free podcast available called Meet the Experts, Future of Doing. It's available on Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, wherever. And after this, if you're interested, you can go in and listen to the full insights. Today, I'm just going to focus on the really, really top line insights that came out of the study. And I'd also like to start, I would love to be able to play you just an entire presentation of sound bites from people that we interviewed, but we won't do that tonight. Instead, I'm just going to play you one to indicate the kind of sentiment around the first topic, which is purpose.
I think purpose internally is always worthwhile, right? Because it then enables you to have a lens on which you can judge everyone's actions or decisions with the assumption that the purpose is correct, right, and valid for whatever reason. So I think I think it needs to be kind of genuine and actually kind of hard. It's something you can feel in your stomach that you can touch and feel, and it shouldn't have any, it's a bit like company values when they start putting them on the wall, you're fucked.
So he was a great participant, and also was generous enough to let me share this information. So he is one of the original Google employees, highly innovative individual who's been enabling innovation and startups. He worked with me in an innovation lab in London. And he is, like a lot of people in this community, relatively cynical about things that are considered to be inauthentic or exploitative. So that's one of the key insights around purpose. I have to keep moving this window, by the way, so apologies if I'm clicking. Anyway, so first of all, when you deliver a purpose statement as a business, the most important thing is that you are incredibly authentic about what it is that you actually do. And it's something that needs to be operationalized. So when we speak to people at Instagram, for example, who have a very high ranking on employee experience, they operationalize their purpose. So when they talk about their values that sit underneath purpose, they make sure that it's seeded into the work that they choose, the way in which they evaluate people. They contribute free sprints to any of the values that have been underrepresented. And you could argue that they are $1 billion company and they have a lot of room to do that. But a lot of what they do is not, it's not expensive. It's just authentic. The other thing that's important is that if you're going to talk about being a force for good socially, then you have to be able to show that and measure it and reflect it back to your employees. So it's not good enough to have a campaign. I spoke to a number of creators about campaigns and people who work in marketing, and they were very skeptical about running awareness campaigns as being a sign of purpose. I think one of them said awareness campaign is like looking at a burning building and pointing it and saying, look, it's on fire. So even though it's really great to use your skills to raise awareness, at the end of the day, if you're an organization that has a sense of purpose that you state explicitly, it has to be more than just occasionally taking part in a charitable event. It has to be shown within your operations as a business. So the second is enabling better work and side projects. So what made me extraordinarily happy when I interviewed so many varied people around the world is that regardless of where they came from, and this is something that researchers get super excited about when we see really strong patterns across a very diverse sample, is that all of them said in one way, shape or form that all they wanted from their lives in terms of their individual purpose was to be able to do really great work that had an impact on the audience. And they also, almost all of them had a side hustle or another type of creative outlet. So, strategists who are writers and, techs who are musicians, and also people who have products that they're building. So it's like a combination of things that make for us an individual sense of purpose in this creative making community. So number one, I want to be able to do good work that has an impact on the audience I'm designing for. And I also want to be able to continue to grow my ability and my skill by having my own interests. So organizations that really win with creative makers are those that understand that side hustles are a part of the way that person works. And so there are some consultancies who will invest in side products, or they'll give people time off because they know that they want to pursue those things. And then ultimately, when people have other projects, it makes them better at what they do. And so, yeah, exactly. Also enabling better work and not lying about it. So don't, as an organization, say that you're highly innovative when people are sitting at a desk and working on EDM mockups. Like that is something which causes a tremendous amount of distrust within this community. However, if you say it ahead of time, this is what we do, then that's okay too, because at least people know what the organization is about and what they're actually doing. And then there's a big question around skills development, which most organizations are really, really bad at. So even when we speak to engineers who have got a very complex degree that sits underneath what they do, they'll say things like, I went through that qualification, but that's only about 25% of my learning. The vast majority of what I do today has been learned on the job by just getting access to the right leaders who can train me and the right type of work. Most organizations will have a kind of training budget, and people will be sent off on conferences and courses and maybe sometimes required to get a certification. But what's missing is intrinsic, dedicated training within the organization from leadership on a regular basis. And that is important for purpose because people are trying to excel. What's interesting about this group of people is that they're extremely impact driven. So they want to see the impact of their work on the people that they design it for. And they also want to be the best they can be at what they do. And so those are things that drive them. Okay, so am I valued? This was, I guess, not necessarily disturbing in a sense because we knew that there were issues within the industry, but certainly issues around diversity and intolerance became so apparent. So we asked everyone questions around whether they felt as if there was any bias. So we didn't just ask people who traditionally would experience that, but everyone. And there were so many forms of discrimination that people faced against being neurodivergent, being foreign, being from the wrong class, in addition to ethnicity and gender, etc. So many people feel as though they're not understood and that they're discriminated against based on who they are. And to be honest, as someone who's part of the creative making community and as someone who's partially neurodiverse, which I'll go into in a bit, we are a group of weirdos. We aren't sort of very typical people. And so there needs to be a tremendous amount of tolerance to be able to create environments in which we feel valued and comfortable. So something that's very significant to me is the fact that there is such a limited connection between impact and reward within most organizations. So what most organizations do when they go through their annual review cycle, which seems to create a lot of skepticism amongst most people for a multitude of reasons, but a lot of it is now skewing towards 360 reviews. So for those of you who are interested in evaluation, which I'm particularly interested in, have a look at a study called the idiosyncratic rater effect. It talks about how when we evaluate others, we're largely just evaluating them on what we want, because that's how humans think. We are selfish. And so we tend to not be able to see people for what they are and what they contribute. Now, try to sort of think about really complex skill sets, like technologists, for example, who are doing work that a lot of people won't necessarily understand. Think about people who don't have, English is not their first language. Think about people who are neurodiverse and struggle to create connections with others. You've got an entire cohort of people who potentially won't perform well in a 360 review, but may be doing exceptional work. And so we need to do a lot better at evaluation and move away from personality bias, move away from communication bias when we evaluate people, and actually be able to focus on the impact that they have on, the kind of impact that their work has. Okay, so the word nepotism was raised so many times. Nepotism is something which people see throughout businesses with regards to how people are promoted. Salary negotiations, again, are massively problematic for those who are not naturally entitled, so they don't argue for more, they don't necessarily understand their worth. And then this concept about promoting on tenure is something that we've become used to, and we all think that that's what we're entitled to. So we'll say, well, we stuck it out for 3 years and it's our time now. We kind of deserve a promotion. But it ultimately has nothing to do with impact. It has nothing to do with talent. And that's something which, again, becomes problematic. And lastly, this question of salary transparency. So we don't have enough data to see the impact of salary transparency. So being like totally transparent about what people are earning. It is the only way in which we'll know for sure that people are being paid fairly. However, in order for you to set that up as an organization, you have to take a number of things into consideration. So first of all, it's going to change the market, and the market doesn't necessarily have anything to do with ability. Sometimes it's just got to do with whether that skill is at a premium. It also, what we found though, is organizations that are already close to salary transparency. So they're very clear about the bands, but they're also super clear about what you need to do to get into those buckets, have far more trust from their employees. And so more and more organizations are experimenting with salary transparency. And I think ultimately, hopefully we'll end up getting to that point. So one of the key insights that I found, I'm just sorry, if I keep doing this, it's because I'm trying to drag the window and I can't because I'm 45 and incapable of using technology. Anyway, sorry, I'm trying to read my slides behind the window. Anyway, so what's become really apparent to me throughout the study is that we are so far away from paying people and paying for services, creative services, based on the impact that they have. So when we think about how we pay people in the creative making community, we're paying them on a multitude of different things, as I said, that have nothing to do with how their brain can contribute towards the ultimate commercial outcome of that business. We don't know how to quantify that. So we might say, well, you're building a product and we think that the return on investment on that product is X. So we think that you're going to generate a certain amount of revenue from this campaign. And maybe that's how we should pay you. Value-based pricing is something that very few organizations understand as well. And so we've got a long way to go to prove the commercial value of creative thinking and innovation in an organization, and then figuring out how we charge for those services based on that, and how we pay people based on the value of creativity. Unfortunately, a lot of creatives are still massively exploited, even though they are exceptional at what they do. So how is my work sold? So one of the most, I guess, contentious questions exists mostly within agency and consultancy land more than anything is the topic of pitches. And I can say that most creative makers fundamentally despise pitching. It's not because they like the rush, they like the camaraderie, they like the parameters. All of that is true. And some people love the performance, the pitch presentation. But it is such an exploitative way and also inaccurate way to choose a creative making partner. So it's exploitative because very often organizations are still expected to give ideas away for free. For a creative maker, that's a kick in the teeth, because what you're actually saying is your ideas are like a hobby, and what you do is like a hobby, and you just, do this for fun. And so we'll just take those ideas and we'll give them to whatever agency wins. And thanks for nothing. So that still happens. The kind of hours that people have to work on pitches is not great. And so I did ask people, what's the solution? And all of them really aligned around the idea that what organizations should do is pay for ideation. So the only way you can really find out whether the people you're going to be working with can work with you is to pay them for a couple of weeks, let them come up with a solution, work with them to see how that chemistry works. And ultimately, everyone is a winner at the end of it. I should also say that agencies don't have the best retention rate, not all, but very many. And so what tends to happen is you'll see a big case study review in every pitch, and most of those people will have left the business by the time you take them on board. Not most, but very often that happens. And also, there's no guarantee that they're going to be working on your project. So it's not it's not a great way to work. It makes creative makers feel exploited, and it's also not accurate. Okay, so I hinted at this previously. This sort of whole money versus ideas kind of silo is still happening. So the idea that creative makers aren't commercially orientated and that commercial people aren't ideas people, that exists in a multitude of organizations. But where it becomes problematic is that as we move into this new world that we're going to have to move into post-coronavirus, there is going to have to be a tremendous amount of creativity around the way in which we make money and how we exchange value. I would love to see more creative people applying their problem-solving skills to commercial value exchange. I think it's completely plausible, but the only way we can do that is if we start to work together. So money and ideas working together to do something which is more both valuable, ethical, and lucrative for everyone involved. And then there's this whole question that came up around investment. So we're living in an age where it's all about innovation, and the idea we have in our minds is that it's easy to get funding if you're a startup and you've got a great idea and everyone's spinning up a different product. But a lot of that money is still flowing towards a kind of pretty, I guess, a white male middle class cohort, not in all cases. And if you're a white male who has got a great idea, no offense, it's just that the money is still not flowing into communities that probably have exceptional ideas, and also are building ideas that are complicated in nature and can't be simplified down to a nice narrative that they can pitch to a VC. So there's a number of questions around how we're unlocking innovation in communities that aren't necessarily always given an opportunity. Okay, so the crux of the whole thing, which is, can I do great work? And again, this is aligned to purpose, which is a very big question. So when we ask people about the best work that they've done, keeping in mind that a lot of the people we spoke to were utterly exceptional in their field, so people who really had delivered extremely innovative work and very creative work, it always ended up being about the people they worked with. So the way they described great work always ended up being about the people, the small team they worked with and how they worked together. And so what's become apparent is that innovation work is largely it's small teams, which is why a lot of R&D teams are very small, multidisciplinary people working together. So the comfort with uncertainty and fun is something that a lot of organizations really struggle with. So I just want to say, I absolutely despise enforced fun. As soon as I'm asked to join a team building event or a paintballing event, or there's a foosball table somewhere, I just want to curl up, and I hate that kind of thing. So when I talk about fun, I don't mean that kind of fake agency fun. What I mean is that the best ideas often come out of play. And so when you have creative making teams or R&D teams working together, they need the opportunity to just play. And that sometimes means not being where you can see them. And it means that they're going to, have a whole bunch of banter and just be silly and do what they need to do. The creative making process is also uncertain. And as one of the creative technologists we spoke to said, people need to be comfortable with the discomfort of creativity, because what tends to happen in the creative process is that you just have a whole bunch of scattergun ideas and you don't know when you're going to come up with an idea, but you do eventually. Another participant said that most agencies are not designed around the way that the brain works, which is that we access a lot of great ideas from our subconscious, and that comes through play and fun. And so creating environments where that's allowed to happen is very important too. And then this whole idea of real problems. I mean, marketing got such a strong bashing in this study, and we spoke to a lot of creative directors and people who'd worked in advertising and marketing, but they often used the term marketing problems when they referred to problems that they didn't consider to be real problems. And I think when they talk about the fact that they want real problems to solve that can have an impact, they don't necessarily mean altruistic ideas that are going to change society. They mean a problem that they consider to be real for the audience. A lot of the time, marketing briefs are really about the business trying to get attention from people who maybe don't want to give them attention. And so that does happen. And so I think, we have to be able to create briefs or things that focus on actual problems. So just moving into environment, because I'm aware of the fact that I might be going over time soon. This is about feeling situated. What came out of this part of the interview, we asked people about their comfort levels in the workplace, and we kind of stumbled onto how big the topic of neurodiversity is in this community. So for those of you who are unaware of what neurodivergent or neurodiversity means, it covers people on the autism spectrum, which we all are, but people who are on the slightly further on the autism spectrum. ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, a number of different cognitive wiring differences that make you not typical. I have realized over time that it's something that is very apparent in people who have high numeracy, creative, and linguistic skills. And I've also realized that in markets like the UK, neurodivergence has become something that the adult population is starting to recognize in themselves. I did an ASPE test. I'm partially neurodivergent. I didn't know that. There are a whole bunch of things that I am very controlling about, and I didn't know why. And I realized that it's because I am partially neurodivergent. So there's certain things that I can do faster than other people, but then there are also social things that I struggle with. And that is something which is quite common. If workplaces are not designed around neurodivergent people, it's hugely traumatic for them. And that's light, sound, people standing behind them, playing certain types of music. If there isn't natural light, it stops people from cognitively functioning. So it's not just a preference, it prevents people from thinking. So big insight for us. And it led us to realize that there needs to be extreme flexibility around time and place. I think in a couple of years' time, we're going to say we used to make people come into an office and sit in the same spot for like from 9 to 5. That's insane. It's a crazy construct. When you have a deadline and you communicate with your colleagues, how people spend that time, when they wake up, when they start working, when they finish working, where they work from should be entirely their business. And certainly for neurodivergent people, that's important, and creative makers. Never enough whiteboards and ideation spaces. That's something which came up constantly. So being able to drop off into a room and do your own thing. I can see some messages, but unfortunately I can't access them in case anyone is messaging me. Sorry. And then also meetings are the bane of everyone's existence, and there are far too many of them. I've been speaking to designers through this whole coronavirus crisis, and they're saying to me, I really wish that I've now got more meetings because people are calling me every 5 seconds and I can't do my work. And everyone thought they were going to have an opportunity to go to a quiet space and just focus on designing and thinking. And instead people are conferencing them every 5 seconds. And so meetings, whether they're virtual or not, need to just back off a little bit with this group. Okay, so again, the point about neurodivergent people experiencing a sense of discomfort when their space is not designed around them is a significant one. And the last theme, which we're going to continue with after this, is collaboration. This is not a kind of a touchy-feely, let's all hug one another collaboration point. It's about the fact that great contemporary ideas simply cannot happen without collaboration for multidisciplinary teams and across businesses. Politics kills creativity. There are so many cohorts within organizations that are perpetually looking at ways to gain more territory and not focus on ideas. And that creates a problem. If you want to execute on an idea that involves technology and that is seamless for customers, it needs to move across silos. It's impossible to do with politics in place. Technology and communication, as you would be learning in these few weeks, for those of you who haven't really worked from home before, and even those who have, if you don't have the right communication rhythm and you don't have the right tools and you don't have the right technology, collaborating globally obviously is impossible, remotely is impossible, and with your team is impossible. And lastly, just respect the chemistry. Unfortunately, we have a lot of businesses that are designed around a resourcing model assigned to roles, not people. And so when you say, well, we need a strategist, a designer, and we'll just bunch these people together based on who's available, very often it'll fall over and no one knows why. And that's because creative making is largely about chemistry. It takes a time to build. Sometimes it's immediate. There is some concepts around agile at scale and stable teams and squads that will help you with that. But ultimately, chemistry is very important. Okay, so lots of insights. So where the future of doing study is going to be going now is into a touring workshop. So we don't know what touring means right now. It might mean a remote workshop. We might just push it out to the end of the year. Our first workshop was going to be in Singapore in April, but that's been moved. We do potentially have plans for London, New York, and Berlin that might progress. We're not sure, but it will happen this year in some way, shape, or form. In those sessions, there's an entire day dedicated to one pillar. What we're doing in those sessions is going into far, far more detail around the insights that I've spoken to you about now. We will then do an exercise where we will teach people to map the current state of their business. So how do you map behaviors to purpose, for example? And then we're going to go through an ideation of thinking about really seemingly impossible ideas around workplace that we can do something really new and fresh. Okay. I'm moving into the final stretch. We're nearly there. Okay, so whether you attend or not is not significant. That is, we'd love to have you there, but what we'd like is to continue with this concept of a movement. And a movement starts when a group of influential people take those insights and act on them and distribute them throughout the world. So we're going to move into a working session. What I've highlighted throughout this is that collaboration and multidisciplinary thinking is something that is impacting every single one of those pillars. Right now, this is how organizations work. You have a CEO at the top, you have a bunch of team leads, they're reporting to the CEO, and very often they'll climb over each other to get the next top spot. They have a team, they're responsible for a silo, and ultimately what that means is that collaboration is not enabled from the outset. What we need to move into is, if you're a leader and you have a skill, you need to think of yourself as an expert, and your role is to enable practitioners of different backgrounds in whatever they need to learn. And so you need to have empathy for others. You need to understand what other people do. You need to share your skills as much as possible across the board, and you need to develop a shared form of KPIs. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Dan, who is going to...
So I'm going to close out now. So first up, I'd like to thank Tracy for sharing this evening, and to learn more about the organisations connected to this event. And I want to say thank you first of all to Mural, who you've all had a great play with. Now they've got templates and tools, so sign up, have a look. It's really good. Also to Spaces Works, they're globally located co-working spaces. They foster great communities. Although that might not seem so relevant in the near term, we're looking forward to being in Melbourne soon and hosting some more of these events, as well as the Berlin School of Creative Leadership. I really want to thank them this evening for allowing Tracy to share some of the study. So before I close out, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for being part of this meetup. If you have any questions about the session or remote work, please contact us at start@morespaceforlight.com.au. Have a lovely evening, day or morning. Please stay safe. Please look after each other and stay sane. Thank you for your time. Take care, everyone. Give us a big wave. See you later.